Keith again, back for another podcast with my comrade, good friend, Kier, SoCal anarchist, and honestly, Twitter extraordinaire.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I mean, some super content. Um, yeah, I'm down. I'm in Seattle right now, and I missed the talk by one day. Kier was in Seattle a couple days ago, and it's July 4th, and I think we should talk
Land
about that.
back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You were posting a lot about what was going on at Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
Thoughts about the Trump rally?
I mean, would you like thoughts about how absolutely idiotic it is to have a rally during COVID, or would you like me to talk about the fact that they're gassing Lakota on not U.S. land? Or where shall we start?
Well, I think the Lakota.
Yeah, it's not. I've been following it, but not a lot really. It's interesting though that I know I posted something earlier. Maybe I posted something earlier. I know I liked something earlier from one of my friends who had posted that while the Lakota were negotiating with the park rangers, the National Guard came in behind them and used that opportunity to start just tear gassing them, which I have thoughts and issues. I mean, in general, you've got the whole fact that chemical warfare is not great, to say the least. Yeah, you could call it a war crime, but I don't know. It's a whole lot of, on top of just the very long history of genocide, native genocide, and pushing people over to reservations and then breaking those treaties. It's just having to see it again and again and again, especially like now. It's a little aggravating that not everyone is upset by this. And the fact that people are telling the Lakota to go back to where they came from, like,
Where?
You first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it also, like, immediately in our history. Like, 2016, we had the Dakota Access Pipeline struggle with, I mean, it was fascinating how there was the big struggle and they were doing everything they can to stop this pipeline, and then Obama gave like a 10-minute freeze, and all of a sudden it's out of the media as if like it's over, and
it's not.
And they built it right through. And now today with Donald Trump, like, I honestly haven't seen enough coverage from mainstream news about the actual reaction to the protests. I've seen, outrage over COVID or outrage over the symbolism and like what Mount Rushmore is. And he's killing it with these dates right now. We had Juneteenth,
Yeah, that's all. That's got to be very well planned by his cabinet, and especially Stephen Miller.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so like with the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock, the punishment then that we've got wasps out here. The punishment then that South Dakota levied against the natives was, now you can't vote.
Right.
So, and that I was doing a lot of research because I was in the process of writing a paper on it. but that really parallels what happened with Wounded Knee back in 1970 something, you know. And so it's just a constant, it's really just constant genocide.
Yeah. Yeah, constant genocide and creeping genocide. And I think also we're seeing like just it's a slow militarization of both Native communities and Black and Brown communities in the cities as well. It's like these, I mean, after like the Wounded Knee standoff, they like militarize the entire zone, and then you get like Leonard Peltier, who gets arrested and convicted for something that he most certainly didn't do. We're still seeing it today, and it's worse in Seattle, because I'm here in Seattle, than it is in Los Angeles. Police are still so militarized and so present in these communities right now. So yeah, I guess sort of to switch gears to America's other original sin. It seems like what's happening right now is different to me. What is your immediate take on sort of the widespread effect that these protests seem to be having? Is this revolution? Please say it is. Like, please.
I'm really hoping that people don't just give up and go home. The problem, though, that I'm seeing is that there's a lot of liberal influence coming in and trying to tamper down what is a revolution, and it's really detrimental. That's why CHOP fell. You know, that's why you've got complete lack of media coverage now, right? Like the protests haven't stopped. Like people are still out marching in thousands, and there's no media coverage whatsoever outside of, you know, independent media like Unicorn Riot and It's Going Down, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's every night, and I think that's one of the rallying calls that you hear in these streets is, you know, every day. Like how many days? Every day.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like just yesterday, we were. Well, I overheard a conversation back in Los Angeles of two women who were voicing their fear over Palestinian protests.
Uh-huh.
How scary it was that Palestinians were marching in the streets. And one of the women said, like, oh, everyone's fighting for a cause now. And, like, she said it belittlingly.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, everyone's fighting for a cause now. We saw yesterday people protesting U.S. support for the Philippines. And I think about Mikhail Bakunin, the anarchist, talked about the 1381 peasant revolt, mm-hmm. and how it was entirely spontaneous. How effective do you think like the liberal efforts to co-opt the revolution as it stands right now, how effective is it if it is spontaneous and as spontaneous as it's been?
I mean, I think because of the power dynamics in the US and who has control over the media will say a lot and will do a lot to, you know, there's the propaganda and everything else. They'll do a lot to try to tamper it. But really, I think that's where, you know, mutual aid and actual organizing within small autonomous groups helps. Because then you have that communication on the ground as opposed to just trying to follow news sources, because they're not going to tell you anything, you know. Like we drove through, where did we drive through? We drove through somewhere, I think further up north, and like everything was boarded up, and it was just like not a large town, right?
Right.
But you know, the people I was with was like, why is everything still boarded up? It's like, well, you know, just because you're not seeing, you know, a lot of what's going on in the news doesn't mean that it's not still happening. You know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And like you're talking about sort of these principles of mutual aid and autonomous organizations sort of asserting themselves. Like, how present do you think anarchism is? And what does anarchism mean to you?
I mean, I'm kind of in an echo chamber.
Sure.
No. So what I see is coming from a lot of anarchist and socialist groups. And I would say it's pretty prevalent. It's, you know, like that's coming from my echo chamber, and I have to be aware of that. Like, you know, I'm not going to be seeing a whole lot of what liberal influences have to say about it, just because, you know, unless one of my cohorts will retweet something, for instance, and be like, look at this dumbass. Right? It's like, I'm not going to see a whole lot other than a lot of anarchist and socialist discussion of what's happening, like within the protests.
Yeah. And what are the anarchists saying? What for the people watching this who maybe only get the liberal media, or God forbid conservative media?
I can't imagine what the conservative media looks like for them. I almost want to know, but at the same time, it's just like, oh god. Yes. Like I know what they're saying, but at the same time, it's like, oh.
Is it real? Do you guys believe that? Like, is that really what you think?
This is the future that anarchists want.
Right.
Yes, in fact. Yeah, so a lot of it is, yeah, this is revolution. Yeah, this is not just about, you know, reforming the police, because it's not, and it shouldn't be, and reforming them doesn't work. It ought to be completely about dismantling them.
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
Yeah, so
from an anarchist point of view. Dismantle the police, dismantle the military, dismantle the state. Just get rid of it all.
Exactly.
But I do also see a lot of defund it. And it's like, incrementalism also, from my personal point of view, isn't going to work. You know, you're always going to have people who are going to co-opt it. And you've seen that with the incrementalism in states, where you've gone from, you know, a monarchy, for instance, in Russia, to state capitalism. But, you know, they call it communism. And it wasn't. But that incrementalism isn't going to work because of power dynamics, and because, you know, once people get that taste of power, they're going to want to keep it, you know, and they're not going to want to let that go.
Exactly. Well, that's, yeah, well, says when the people are beaten with a stick, they are not much happier if it is called the people's stick,
yeah.
Which is brilliant. I love that, man.
It's true.
But it's absolutely true. As far as, like, I guess, baby steps versus revolution, I think, like, how enamored were you with Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Sanders movement? Were you like, nah, it's bullshit, it's bourgeois electoral politics?
I mean, yeah, I don't believe in electoralism, but for me, Bernie was more of a compromise.
Right.
You know, it's like, if you people can accept just these basic things, you know, basic healthcare for fucking everybody, you know, like, if you can accept just the small things, then I can see how incrementalism could work. But they couldn't, right? So to me, it's like, well, point proven. Yeah, sure, go vote for your guy, but, you know,
absolutely. Yeah,
it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, you had an interesting tweet recently where you said basically like they expect anarchists, and I don't know if this was.
Oh my god, it was a subtweet.
Oh, it was okay.
It was a subtweet.
Okay, sure. But like, it was like we expect anarchists to vote for
neoliberals,
but nonetheless, Joe Biden, who's worst of the worst. Yeah. Like, I mean, there's substantive differences, I think, even between him and Hillary Clinton. Like, gun to my head, have to choose. I would probably choose Hillary Clinton.
I would choose the gun.
Gun. Yeah.
Not gonna lie.
But like, I don't know what Noam Chomsky is saying. We got to vote Joe Biden, and I know, but we can't. I don't think. At least Noam Chomsky's genuine, right? Like, dismantle his argument, though.
I mean, you know,
that's my guy, so you gotta be.
I gotta be nice. Look, I mean, he's had decent ideas, yeah, but I'll give him that.
Ideas.
There you go. I'll give him that. But the idea that voting for Joe Biden is going to be harm reduction is such cop-out bullshit, right? Like, what is the purpose of voting for the guy who wrote the crime bill? You know, how is that harm reduction? How is any of his policies from the time he's been in Congress, how is any of that harm reduction? Like, you can't sit there. And I mean, I have issues with Joe Biden even being pushed, you know, as someone who's very clearly not lucid. You know, I mean, there's a whole lot of elder abuse going on there, I feel. But
absolutely. Yeah.
Aside from that, like, just looking at his policies, and, you know, even if you look at some of the stuff that he's been saying, like, you know, if Medicare for All were to come across my desk, I'd veto it. Or, you know, and I know you're much younger than a millennial. You know, I have no empathy for millennials. It's like, why would you think that even liberal younger people should be voting for this person? Yeah.
Well, he's so far right. Like, it's insane. Like,
the fact that you can get a fascist to fall left of him on some policies.
Yeah.
Like giving people $1,200
right.
for 4 months of no jobs, right? How could you say that? How could you say that this person is someone that's gonna do harm reduction?
Right, absolutely. I think that's certainly with Chomsky and some others, like, part of the issue. They'll say things like, we could push him on some things. Like, I don't think that's the case.
Absolutely not.
I do think, though, well, I'll ask you, do you think that there is substantive difference between Biden and Trump? Like if we were to not look from a strategic point of view, just objectively at the two individuals? Because like Cornel West would say in like 2016, as he was like saying campaigning for Jill Stein,
Mm-hmm.
he would like say it's I think it was a catastrophe versus disaster, and a catastrophe is worse than a disaster, but both are like terrible. Do you think it's a catastrophe disaster situation, or they're both?
No, they're both absolutely. I think Biden is going to be more insidious because people are willing to overlook his track record, and especially some of the language that he's used on the floor, you know, and they're going to overlook that because he's a Democrat, he's liberal, right? Whereas with Trump, it's, okay, you're very obviously a white nationalist, you know. So it's yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of like Obama's militarization of the police is sort of
a direct result of having.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think seeing as Biden is entirely like cognitively incapable of putting sentences together, like we have to, like Obama's cabinet was chosen a month before the election by the head of fucking Citigroup, you know, like
yeah.
We know who's gonna be running the show, and it's not even a politician, which is Trump. Really, like behind Biden is gonna be Trump-like characters.
Yeah.
With likely equal records on sexual assault, equal records on racist economic or like endeavors as far as like Trump's history with like racialized contracts and all these things. Like we don't even fucking know who's going to be running the show, which may be more scary.
I mean, I think we do have a pretty good idea because even now, you know, we know, and a lot of people, I think, just choose to ignore, but we know that the people who run the show are the corporations, you know,
right.
Which sounds so conspiracy theorist, but really it's the lobbyists because it's the money, right? And the politicians want to keep the money that they get, so they're gonna continue to support the policies that will ensure that they keep getting those funds.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You posted a video of Murray Bookchin.
Yes, I love that video.
Yeah, and he talks about why he's an anarchist and how. And can you sort of talk about that and how that resonates with you, and maybe even like how it relates to right now?
Yeah. So for me, I became an anarchist, like straight up, when I was 13.
You were a teenage anarchist?
I was. No, but that had a lot to do with, because, you know, I grew up in a household in academia because my parents are both in academia. And so I got exposed to a lot of politics as a kid. And, you know, I started marching in protests, I think, when I was like 11 or 12. Like I very, very well remember that my very first protest was when I was in 6th grade. So, but, well, no, I called myself before I was 13 a Marxist.
Okay.
But there was a thing that happened, and you can read, it's my pinned tweet, where I've just got this whole long thing. So if you start at the very top and read all the way through, you'll see, like, for me, becoming an anarchist was because I learned very early on how power structures work, you know, and how sure what happened for me was on an individual scale, but because it also involved the state, like obviously this scales up, you know? So for me, understanding that power structures, and I think the quote that I remember most from, my childhood is power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, right? It's like a huge quote. But tying that in with what was going on for me was like, oh, okay. So in order then to not have like these inequalities and these power struggles, you can't have any power at all. Like you can't have those hierarchies, which is what Bookchin was talking about, right? Like it's the hierarchies that create the power struggles, and that create the inequality, and that create what we're seeing today, because it's such a vast difference in power. And I know a while back, I tweeted this whole thing on why the police, despite not being people who are in power, like at the top of the chain, why they continue to exert that force to help those in power maintain that power, And a lot of it has to do with they've gotten kind of a taste for it, right? Like they've learned, and, we've been taught in schools, you too can be a part of this power structure, within a capitalist society. All you have to do is work hard and you'll get there, right? So and I'm not at all in any way, defending cops, like, but you have to understand how the education system works, and it starts when we're very young, how the education system works and how we're taught from a very young age. If you work hard, if you toe the line, if you follow in these footsteps, if you follow these steps, you too can be successful, you too can be moneyed, you too can have power. And so that's probably also why you've got a lot of people who have absolutely no power saying, I want this, and this is how I can get this, And so you've got a lot of the right-wing folks and a lot of the liberals too, being like, well, why are you protesting? This is stupid. Like, if you don't like it, leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also for like a lot of, and I don't know if this is too insider baseball for like people who are listening to anarchists talking, but a lot of the like Marxist critique of ideology and like Gramsci's like critique of hegemony and all these things, you can find it in like plain language in anarchist like philosophy,
Yeah.
Like Bookchin's talking about, it's not just about like the class dynamic, or it is, but in like all of its ways that it manifests,
intersectional, really.
Yeah.
The academic term one would use.
But like, I think that like, anarchists, like, because it's so intended to be of the people, are most clear in their critique of society, and sort of the critique of what you're talking about, and like this American dream myth, and like how that pacifies, and who's your favorite anarchist?
Honestly, Emma Goldman.
Yes.
Like, because, so for me, a lot of theory is really tedious and dull to get through. So like writers like Malatesta and Goldman really parsed that down in a way that's digestible for the common man, the hoi polloi, you know. So for me, it's writers like that who make it easy for everyone really to understand theory that I prefer, you know. Like Marx he was all right. Like I read him when I was 12. No, but that was hard reading.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think even like Bakunin and Kropotkin, as much as I love them, that can be difficult stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, Kropotkin will oftentimes like quote or like refer to prominent like liberal theories to debunk them or whatever, but it's
yeah. And then you have to go and you have to read those theories.
Exactly. Whereas like, and I don't even think both Malatesta and Emma Goldman, not only is it entirely digestible, but it's
all taken from experience.
Experience, exactly. It's on the ground stuff that they're talking about, but it's also like insightful in their own ways.
Yeah.
In their own ways, you know? I mean, I think about like Bakunin sort of like predicted the red bureaucracy, you know, with his like people's stick quote that if you have a state that's communist, they're just going to take over the like means of worker resistance and they're going to become like authoritarian. But Emma Goldman fucking lived it, you know. She was in Russia and she said, "Look, he was right," you know.
Yeah.
I wonder though. There is still very much so online, and I know you're enmeshed in it, and you posted some, I can't remember the anarchist, who was talking about sort of like why we need to get rid of the state. Is that debate today silly? Maybe, like, because we don't have revolution and because the state is so powerful, like, should we even be discussing with, you know, the Communist Revolutionary Party about whether we should have a dictatorship of the proletariat or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk about this with my socialist and communist friends a lot, where they do think that incrementalism is necessary, right? And a huge argument they have is, well, if you're just having like these small anarchist collectives, how are you doing community defense? You know, how are you going to ensure that a state doesn't come in and take over? And it's like, well, okay, that is valid, but you also have to look at communities like Rojava and Chiapas and Sharan, you know, where it's, I mean, Sharan does a pretty good job of, I guess, vetting the people that come through. But like Rojava's, you know, the Kurds are always at war, trying to maintain, you know, their community. And it's just something I think that's going to, unfortunately, have to keep happening, you know, until you do have an overarching non-state existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I think Zapatistas are probably the most successful or the most stable.
Yeah.
Speak about it. But I think like they were throwing up, if I remember correctly, a presidential candidate just to like be funny, like presidential candidate. Yeah. I mean, the Kurds are. It's very. I think a lot of these sort of revolutionary projects, like they've yet to take place in a superpower.
Yeah.
We had, you know, of course, the Bolsheviks. That was in 1917. That was a superpower, certainly.
Yeah. And then they murdered all the anarchists.
Yeah, exactly, right. Everyone needs to read Emma Goldman's account of what happened there.
Yeah.
But how far is revolution from? How far are we from revolution in the U.S., do you think? I mean, are we getting there? You know?
I mean,
are we? You know?
So here's my take on it. I think, as much as I hate to say it, like, we're gonna have to be armed if we want revolution to be successful, or even make a dent, you know, because this whole country is so militarized, and because so much of our money goes into the military and weapons and maintaining power, you know, not just here, but like globally, right? It'll be hard to actually have a full revolution, especially with all of the propaganda coming out of the mainstream, you know, especially with the education system really teaching the young people that, you know, capitalism is the way, you know. Yeah, it's going to be hard for revolution, I think, to really take off, because there's going to be a lot of tamping down, and you see it all the time with Portland, with Philadelphia, with Seattle, you know, where New York even, where it's anytime the people start to rise up, those in power really tamp it down. And they'll tamp it down through the violence, right, from the police and the National Guard. They'll tamp it down through liberal co-opting. And they'll tamp it down through the use of people who don't understand the power structures coming in and just condemning, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think social media does give us some, you know, chance of really
Absolutely.
alternative media and alternative viewpoints. But I think, yeah, even things like defund the police, like initially that, as far as I understood it, was synonymous with abolish the police, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
but then you've got people co-opting it with, no, what we mean by defund is actually like take some of the money and give it to others, you know. Don't have the police do all of the work, just have them do some of the work. It's like, no, it's not what we mean. We mean get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly. And you had like in Minneapolis when the mayor came and he was like, he understood it as, you know, get rid of the police, and it seemed like the protesters understood it as that, and he said he didn't do that. They said fuck off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. I think it's risky sometimes to like not do away with. I think ideally we should all be entirely disillusioned by the state and capitalism, and we should not assume that any substantive gains could come from working within the system.
Exactly.
I do agree that there are differences in candidates sometimes, and I wouldn't want to like take the risk of saying we should just not take part and radicalize like our communities if our communities aren't being radicalized, right? You know, and I think certainly with like, I think of like, it's the Revolutionary Communist Party with Bob Avakian, like they're so like sure that like revolution is now, but the people aren't supporting them. So it's, what is, right? How pacifying, at one point do we have to say enough and try to end like the pacification of like the electoral system? And as compared to like, when should we be saying, well, if we have a candidate like Bernie Sanders, for the immediate gains, we should be supporting?
Sure. So for me, it was Bernie Sanders was harm reduction to me, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, you're still a liberal capitalist, but at least you would push for these things, right? But I also understood, that the Democratic Party wasn't going to give him the candidacy, right? I mean, at the very least, if they wanted to maintain their power, they would have given him some of the electoral votes, right? But you saw it with him, you saw it with Booker recently in Kentucky, where they've got such an iron grip on maintaining the power that a few lives lost, through protests or through an armed attempt at revolution or an unarmed attempt at revolution, right? Isn't going to matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so like I said, March maybe, and I can send you that tweet if I can find it. But sure, if you find a candidate that is actively going to reduce harm, right, within the system, yeah, toss them a vote. Like, it's not going to kill you. but don't expect that to actually change anything,
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, certainly since like NAFTA and I guess the start of globalization in the 1970s and the shipping overseas of jobs, like the units of power that like the, broadly speaking, like the American proletariat had were dismantled, right?
Yeah.
Unions were crushed. Like, I mean, certainly we see a long history of crushing radical thought with the first Red Scare and the Espionage Act and Sedition Act and the Anarchist Immigration Act, which is crazy that was a thing.
Yeah.
Like, it seems the American state has succeeded in dismantling the direct like tools of power,
mm-hmm.
right? So where, and I think of, well, like in Spain you had like anarcho-syndicalism and the labor unions took over. We don't have labor unions anymore, right? So where is it supposed to come from? Where are we supposed to like draw power?
Yeah, which I think is why the IWW is so important, right?
Right.
But I think it's going to have to be very grassroots, like there's going to have to be a lot of individual power going into this. Like, you can't just believe that you can sit back and someone's going to take care of it for you. Like, you have to be an active participant in this in order to push the movement forward. And I don't know if it's, fear that keeps people back. Because, it's going to be bloody, it's going to suck, right? I mean, we've seen that with people getting getting shot in the eyes, and with the people that got hit last night by that car in Seattle. For the viewers that don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gonna take a lot.
Yeah. And education, I guess, right?
Certainly.
Radicalize the public. It feels like, you know, if Bernie Sanders is the most radical, like Eugene Debs didn't say Democratic,
Yeah.
socialist, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, entirely. I guess, what do the people need to be reading? Let us know, like, where's the, where do we find it? Where do we,
I mean, if you want good news sources for what's going on, certainly, definitely it's going down. Definitely Unicorn Riot, the different anti-fascist groups. So like Rose City, Antifa, a lot of the individual anti-fascists too, especially on Twitter, who are putting out like a lot of information. But yeah, if you want theory, then I would say you could go to anarchistlibrary.org, you know, or, you know, libcom as well. There's a lot of theory there. A lot of easy to read theory as well.
Specifically, of course, Goldman and Malatesta.
Yeah, specifically Goldman and Malatesta.
Who else?
Echo as well. He wrote Fascism.
Okay.
Definitely that you can find on Anarchist Library. But yeah, stuff like that. Like, I would say don't just go through. And I mean, you know, as a journalist, yeah, it's a good idea to not just stick to one news source. So if you're going through the mainstream media, like, don't just watch CNN, or don't just follow CNN or Associated Press or anything like that. Go through all of them, including the right-wing news groups, so that you know what's being put out there.
Exactly.
You know.
With the understanding that it's
yeah, with the understanding that it's propaganda.
Yeah, and like I think there's like the more like disillusioned you get with like mainstream media, the more like people are able to realize like how they're doing it. Also, side note, Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, regardless of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But like the constant blaming of things on anarchists right now, like that goes back to when McKinley was killed, like in 1901. They've been doing this forever. And then also I'd say the dope part about anarchist literature is that it's anti-capitalist and free. Yeah. It's all on the internet. And I would also just plug
libcom.org.
Yeah, libcom.org.
Anarchistlibrary.org.
Exactly. Totally free PDFs. Like, I would just also plug, I believe his name is Abdullah Öcalan, the Kurdish writer who like drew from Murray Bookchin.
Right.
Very interesting. I believe his called Libertarian Municipalism or something like this. But anyway, yeah.
And, you know, if...
What was that?
Sorry. I said, and if reading isn't like your strong suit, you can follow podcasts too, like Eat the Rich and Behind the Bastards.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. YouTube also has readings, like audible books of readings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. Any last word for the people? Only the people listen. Yeah. To the practical extremists.
Yeah. You know, honestly, if you're going to stick to mainstream media, don't box yourself into an echo chamber. Make sure to expand your horizons so that you are seeing all sides, I guess, of what's being presented, so that you can make an informed decision and you're not just taking in whatever information you're being tossed.
Absolutely.
That's a huge one for me. Learn.
Yeah. 100. Thank you, Conrad. Will you come back on the Practical Extremists?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening or watching or however you're doing it. And then also stay tuned. I'm posting stuff from where the shop was. I'm here in Seattle right now. Posting stuff from protests. They're still very actively in revolution. And then follow Kier on Twitter. Can you plug that real quick? I don't have it.
It's Alley Cat Kier. Alley Cat, like ALLEYCATKIER.
And I will also post that on my social media. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.